Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Hangouts and Headlines, or whatever we're doing here. Hangouts and Headlines. Yes, it's been a couple of months since I was doing an episode of this, one of my favorite shows, and I'm so thankful for you all for joining me today, joining me again after a number of months off, and I am excited about this conversation we're going to have. Now, you may notice on your screen, since I have taken a couple months off, I've thought about ways that I want to frame out these episodes. I've changed a few things. I've added a little bit of a comment box in the corner, which StreamYard thankfully added to allow us to have live chats on screen. So that does mean that I am trusting you all with my stream. So please play nice. I am assured that you all will be very good community members and not add anything to my stream that I wouldn't like to see there. But I love to have this conversation, and I love to have discussions about important topics like Taylor Swift and her master recordings. So if you're excited about that topic, thank you for joining me today. We're going to get to it. If you aren't used to Hangouts and Headlines, and who could blame you since we haven't done one in a while, we usually start with a couple of minutes talking to everybody in the community, hanging out from the Hangouts, and then we have the headlines, and then we go back and do a few more Hangouts and answer questions and hopefully get some comments on what we're talking about today. So thank you for joining me. How's everybody doing today? Where's everybody calling in from? I've never figured out a better way to say that. I know you're not calling in, but where are you watching? Where are you joining us from? I'm going to do my best to do this episode a little bit differently than before, to be a little bit more, in legal terms, chill, to take a breath every now and then, to take a few more breaks so that I don't wear myself out and just do these episodes like a virtual legality. So hopefully there'll be a few more minutes for us to converse amongst each other in between these numerous articles that I have ready to go. I have a few thanks to give out and a potentially special announcement at the end. So please hang in there for that. Otherwise, I'm going to check the comments now and see what I can find for you all calling in. So Inigo, good morning from Colorado. Good to see you, Ho. Good to see you, Inigo. I'm very happy to have everybody here. We've already got 20 folks in for this random episode. 4 months, I think, separated from our last one. So thank you for coming. What else do we have? We've got Against the Tide, our fabulous moderator and maker of little images for us, including this one here, which they did for this particular conversation. You can't see it because this is a profile image, but there is a cartoon guitar just under my very generous face from Tide's picks here. So thank you so much, Tide, for doing that and for moderating our streams as you so often do. I really appreciate it. Tracy G joining me and saying that they're calling in. I appreciate it. Calling in from an overcast city of Toronto, which hasn't been as warm as anyone would like. I honestly got resentful here in Michigan in May. May is usually a time where things are really warming up. You can open the doors or windows and really have a good time getting used to the spring and going into the summer. Even at the start of June now, it's still pretty cold in Michigan. We're supposed to have a little bit of a warm front coming this week, but it's been easy to be a little bit resentful because I like to walk around. I like to go on walks and open up the house, and I haven't gotten a chance to do that without at least being mildly cold. So I appreciate that. I hope it gets better for you in Toronto. I certainly hope it gets better for me in Michigan, and hopefully we can both enjoy a warm summer going into June. Let's see what else we got going on. Weird Sister says, have missed this. I've missed it too. That's part of what I want to talk to you all about today, is that it's been difficult for me to make content. You maybe have seen that I've only done one virtual legality in this period as well, because I used to be better equipped to bounce between streaming, video creation, drafting contracts, advising clients, and just kind of putting those hats on and swapping them out at will. And what I have found in the last little while is that it takes a lot more effort and energy to switch those positions. So I have been leaning on the law firm because, in all honesty, I appreciate all the support here and all the patrons and Patreon support and all of the super chats and memberships and everything else that you all give me. And I am so thankful for it. But what keeps the lights on and feeds the family is the legal work. I'm sure that's no surprise to you. So because I was noting that it was very difficult for me to switch, I was leaning more towards the law firm side of things. I will continue to do that. I'm just trying to get that kind of switching energy, switching muscle back up in place so that I can do this content and do these kinds of videos with you more often. So that's one of the reasons why I was gone for so long. I have certainly seen the DMs, seen the messages, and seen the topics that I could have discussed in Virtual Legality or Hangouts and Headlines. I am very sorry that I have not been able to get to those. I'm going to try, starting with this video, to be more available, to do more of this content, because I like these conversations. This is not one of those things where you have to come into my comments or put in my chat that I don't have to feel apologetic. I don't have to be sorry for not doing this content because you guys will wait. I understand that. My community has been great. You've all been wonderful. This is about wanting to be a part of these discussions, wanting to have these conversations with you all, and finding a way forward and to do it. What you may not have noticed, because you weren't here from day one at the channel, and I don't blame you there because those videos have like 12 viewers for the entire runtime, is that the first few months of this channel, I was working through how to do a law firm work and make videos at the same time a lot, and those videos were separated by big long chunks as well. So this is really just me going back to the foundations and figuring out a way forward that can hopefully be a part of this channel and our mornings in the future. So, what is the purple crown for? I don't know what that even means. I don't know if that's code. All right. Let's see here. Weird Sister says, we heard you have had an EDB visit lately. That's actually one of the things I wanted to talk to you all about. So I don't know what Emily D. Baker on her channel has shared with anybody as of this point in time, but Emily did visit me, and I wanted to spend the first little bit of this video specifically calling her out, thanking her for encouraging me to do more Hangouts and Headlines. She visited me in Michigan a little while back. She had some stuff to do in Michigan, and one of the things that she said to me was that she really wanted to encourage me to do more Hangouts and Headlines because she thought it was a useful video series, and she wanted to see me out here doing it. So all I want to say about YouTube and YouTubers in general is that there's a lot of drama out there. There's a lot of backbiting, a lot of knives in backs, a lot of betrayals, and all this stuff that you hear and see. And I know fuels content and adds to some of what people find entertaining about this space. But Emily D. Baker, throughout my entire time knowing her, has been nothing but supportive and encouraging. And I want to call that out because I don't think that gets said enough in this space. But the reason this video exists right now, the reason I am trying to bring Hangouts and Headlines back when streaming solo is one of the more difficult things that I can do for myself right now, is because of Emily D. Baker. So I can see on screen that she's live right now. She's been covering the crap out of the Karen Reed trial. So if you want to go say thanks or tell her that she did a silly thing by encouraging me back online, you can go there right now. I'd prefer it if you stayed here, but she's broadcasting right now. A lot of my colleagues are. They're doing a lot of good work on Karen Reed. I know there's other trials coming up later this year. Please thank you, Emily D. Baker, and let her know that you're happy that Hangouts and Headlines is back because of her, in all honesty. I am doing the work here. I'm putting the videos together, but she was the one that sat across from me at a dinner table and said, I got to get back to doing this. So I really appreciate you, Emily, and I hope you're kicking butt today on Karen Reed and whatever else is going on. Thank you so much, and I did want to share that, so thank you for highlighting that, Weird Sister. I really appreciate it. Okay, what else we have? I think that's everybody that wanted to contribute at this point in time. So we're going to get into the articles very shortly. One of the things I really wanted to talk about in this space that I have talked about kind of obliquely in various other topics in Hangouts and Headlines is the notion of narrative setting, right? Of understanding where people are writing from, why they're writing what they're writing. I am not one that's going to sit here and tell you that I think that the media is lying to you about everything you see. There are others on YouTube and other channels that will say something along those lines. But I think because in order to get our information about the world around us, we have to use media at some level. We can't be in all these rooms. We can't understand all the facts of any given story. One, it's important to not just be that cynical and that dark about whatever anybody's putting out there, but also because I think we can have a better understanding of what some people characterize as lies when in fact it's narrative setting. And so you've seen in the title to this, in the way that I've set up this particular video in Hangouts and Headlines, that I've framed this as good versus evil. I want to talk about a fairly unimportant story in Taylor Swift buying back her master recordings of her own songs. Unimportant in the grand scheme of things, in the continuing life force of the world. Not unimportant because you love Taylor Swift or because you feel one way or the other about her music. Just unimportant in there aren't missiles flying, there's nobody dying in respect of this particular story, but we can take the things that we learn from our understanding of this story and reading these articles that we're going to read today and incorporate our lessons and things that we think about and talk about into stories that are maybe more important, more serious. And that's really where Virtual Legality and Hangouts and Headlines kind of combine their mission statements, which is to say, I'm interested in this stuff too, right? I'm not sitting here and saying that I'm not interested in Taylor Swift and her master recordings, or I'm not interested in the various other things we talk about in Hangouts and Headlines, even if they are on the sillier side of the news that you could otherwise read, like Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively and all the things that we covered earlier this year. But that we can look at these things that we're interested in anyway, and we can apply the lessons that we learned from reading about them to things that are way more serious in life and in the world, and that people are going to bring even more passions and biases and tilts towards when they're reporting on them, when they're discussing them with us. And I think that's part of why I want to do these episodes. So starting there, let's talk about this story. So if you don't know anything about this, we're going to start with the headlines. There are a couple of these articles that are really going to go into the details here that I think are going to be useful. And we'll understand it when we get to the end, which is part of why I like doing headlines, is to discuss these stories just from a completely neutral basis. But we'll also have that aspect of narrative setting to discuss as we go through. So this is Billboard Pro. When we think about tilts, when we think about why they're reporting on this is the music industry reporting on music contracts. So they're going to have a certain amount of tilt towards the musician. Taylor Swift buys back her masters from Shamrock, reclaiming her first 6 albums. Swift, in a surprise move, surprising I think only in the timing, they've been talking about this for a long time, has reclaimed her master recordings years after they were initially sold, first to Scooter Braun's Ithaca Holdings, then to Shamrock Capital. And we see here, Taylor Swift announced on Friday, just a few days ago, that she has regained ownership of her master recordings from Shamrock Capital, the private equity firm that purchased them from Scooter Braun's Ithaca Holdings in late 2020. Now, all that's accurate as far as I could tell, but one of the things I did want to note is when you look at articles and you see reference to a private equity firm, oftentimes that's used in a derogatory manner, and sometimes justifiably so. Private equity firms are known for buying companies and cutting costs and laying off people and all these various other things. I'm tilted on the other side of things because I've represented private equity companies and venture capital companies in the past and know more maybe about the behind the scenes of how they operate and how they make their decisions, and don't see them as an unmitigated evil, even if there are instances where they do bad things. But when we look at stories like this, it's worth noting that private equity references are often used to frame out particularly layoff stories in the video game or other industry that you might see as, oh, Darth Vader swooped in and killed everybody. That's not what's happening here necessarily, but it is worth noting because we're going to talk about Scooter Braun and his equity firm, Ithaca Holdings, as part of this story. According to sources, and there's one where we again frame it out in Hangouts and Headlines where we say, okay, that's an anonymous source. Why is anybody anonymous in this story? There's no danger. There's no gangsters here. What are you doing, Billboard? But we have to understand when we see anonymous sourcing that we can't evaluate for ourselves what biases and tilts they might have because we're not getting that information from the reporter. Shamrock sold Swift's catalog back to her for an amount relatively close to what they paid for it. Now here I'm going to object. You haven't gotten enough information yet because we haven't gotten far enough in the article, but I don't actually think that is in fact the case, which sources tell Billboard was around $360 million. Now this is the first we've seen a number in any of these conversations, but that is the allegation that Taylor Swift spent $360 million to buy this back. Now one thing to note here is that even though we're going to see that Taylor Swift is framed as the Luke Skywalker character, as the good guy in whatever your good versus evil narrative is, that we are ultimately talking about a billionaire spending hundreds of millions of dollars for what could be framed in a different context as effectively a vanity project, right? We already know that she can re-record these things, and we'll talk about why from a legal perspective in just a minute as part of this video. But this is essentially trying to claim ownership of things that she doesn't necessarily need to proceed forward in her career because she wants to. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying she isn't the good guy here, but it's important to understand that in a different context, if this and other article writers weren't trying to frame this as a good versus evil, good versus bad type of narrative, we could look at it from a very different perspective. If Taylor Swift were someone that was on the outs with the public, with however people might feel about her because she said political statements that people didn't like or what have you, then you can imagine these articles being framed very differently. Because I don't have $360 million lying around. I assume most of the people in the chat, maybe not all of the people in the chat, don't have $360 million lying around. So what we're talking about here is a very, very high net worth individual spending a lot of money for reasons that are a little bit opaque. And that will be a part of the story as we proceed through our articles today. But just from the start, it's framed as Taylor Swift buying back her masters, taking back control. You see that they use as their framework here the, I believe, Instagram photo that she used in celebration of getting those masters back. And then we see reference to the letter that she put on her website, which we'll go to in just a minute. And then one line of the pop superstar's purchase, Scooter Braun tells Billboard, I am happy for her. The saga of Swift's masters goes back to June 2019, all the way back then, folks, 6 whole years, when Ithaca purchased Big Machine Label Group, which owned the master recordings to Swift's first 6 albums for an estimated $300 million. So this math here says that Ithaca, that's Scooter Braun's company, buys the entire label for $300 million. Then we look up here and we see that the reference is sources tell Billboard that Taylor Swift spent $360 million buying back her own 6 masters from this group of assets. And then folks want to say that this isn't a lot of money, or that maybe Shamrock or Big Machine didn't make a lot of money in this sale. And I question that math. Swift's catalog was worth at least half of that amount. We'll actually see Variety a little bit later on say it was probably worth about $140 million at the time. Over the years, Swift has very publicly declared her displeasure with the shuffling around of her masters, and in 2019 began re-recording those Big Machine albums in order to restore control over her songs from a commercial standpoint. And like I said, we're going to talk about the difference between music compositions and recordings in just a minute, but just keep in mind that Taylor Swift, the composer, and various other aspects of the artistry of making music retain certain rights that maybe aren't conveyed by contract, but the actual recording is going to be in the hands of the studio, because the studio has spent money getting studio space and mixing and paying for professionals and getting that final sound output ready and out the door for radios or wherever else you might hear it. She also embarked upon and completed her career-defining Eras tour, which rewrote the rules of what a concert tour could be. Now, no further statements there explaining why the Eras tour rewrote the rules of what a concert tour could be. From the outside, as a non-Billboard Pro subscriber and certainly not a professional follower of the music industry, I note that Eras was very large, that it was talked about a lot, and that people in my life knew that it was happening, but I'm unclear as to what it rewrote in terms of the rules of what a concert tour could be. And so I note that only because it's taken as a kind of understood acknowledgement by the reader that the writer here doesn't editorialize or otherwise explain any further. Swift was not involved in Shamrock's 2020 purchase of her music. This was the second time my music had been sold without my knowledge, she said at the time. And this is all very sympathetic, right? They are framing Taylor Swift's own comments, and she's an excellent, if nothing else, public relations expert, right? One of the reasons she is as popular as she is because of the efforts that she made with things like Tumblr and her website and statements like this, where you do get the notion that it isn't as vetted, it doesn't go through as much public relations kind of vetting as others, even if it does. And so she has a skill in sounding like she is talking with the people, and this article uses that to essentially frame her as the sympathetic party here. Shamrock's 2020 statement, after acquiring Swift's catalog from Ithaca, emphasized their admiration for her artistry and the value of her music. They described Swift as a transcendent artist with a timeless catalog and said their investment was driven by belief in the long-term potential of her work. While they had hoped to partner with her directly, they acknowledged and respected her decision not to be involved. Shamrock expressed appreciation for Swift's professionalism and conveyed interest in collaborating with her in the future. So yeah, they're keeping their doors open at this point in the story to say, okay, she doesn't like that a private equity company owned by a person that she doesn't like bought the record label that she used to work for. She then doesn't like that they sold it on to another private equity company, but we want to work with her if she's ever willing to do so. Although terms of the deal were not disclosed at that time, given that sources close to the negotiations say Swift paid a price close to the $360 million price tag Shamrock paid back in 2021, that would imply Shamrock did not make much, if any, profit off the sale of the assets. Now, a couple of things are happening here from a business and law perspective. One is that while we're going to talk about it in just a minute in this article, they are conflating the capital asset value and what the assets are worth to bring in profit at the time, right? So you go and you buy these master recordings, you go and buy the rights to get fees from Spotify, from anyone else that buys or otherwise interacts with those recordings. And you're making money on day one. You're making money throughout that process just from the fact that they exist. Then when you go to sell them on, if you make more money than you bought them at, that's great for you, but you've already made the money that already came in the intervening years. So that's a part of this as well. But it's also worth noting that when we discussed the $300 million above, that was for the entire label. That was not just for Swift's contributions, not just the 6 albums. So I think this math is a little bit off. However, the financial firm with ties to Disney still made a profit of around $100 million in total over the 3+ years it owned the records. And I will tell you, a private equity firm that buys an asset and gets money directly in the door of $100 million on a potential $300 million purchase over the course of 3 years and then sells the asset, not at a depreciated amount, but for more than they bought it at, is going to be happy with that investment. Distribution, marketing, and royalty payments to Swift likely consumed about 50% of the revenue, leaving Shamrock with an annual profit of around $30 million a year. In 2023, Billboard reported that the re-recordings of Swift's albums Fearless and Red were vastly outstreaming their originals since the new versions were released, with the new Fearless earning 3 times the equivalent album units as the original, and the new Red as much as 10 times the original. As of May 22nd, according to Luminate, a platform that gives them this type of data, Speak Now Taylor's version, or TV, has racked up 2.3 million equivalent album units to the original 8.6 million US units, despite the latter having a more than 12-year head start. Now, this is important. I've highlighted all the times they say this. I wanted to mention this for a couple of reasons. One, when you hear 2.3 million versus 8.6 million, you can see that it's not that impressive, just number versus number. So if you want to tell the story that it's actually doing very well, then you have to give additional context, such as the first one has been out a much longer time. And then you repeat that for all the rest of the records here. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that this is a fun game to play with journalists who have to repeat stats like this one. When you're writing this, they try to figure out different ways to say the same thing, right? So you see the different kind of locutions here. Despite the latter having a more than 12-year head start, they use for Speak Now. And then when they're talking about Red, they say, despite the latter having been released nearly 10 years prior to the re-recording, that becomes the latter having had a 13-year head start and finishes off with a 9-year gap in release dates. So that's always fun when you're reading an article to look at the ways that when somebody wants to repeat things, essentially for effectiveness, we want to have a big string citation to establish that these are all very impressive, but they might not look impressive immediately when you put these forth. Then we're going to have to frame this in a number of different ways in order to not bore you with just repeating the same thing over and over again. But also, as we look at a paragraph like this one, think of the writer that doesn't add this context, right? If you're just trying to establish that Taylor Swift's re-recording project is not successful, you just say, well, Speak Now, Taylor's version has only sold 2.3 million versus 8.6 million of the original, or that Red has only sold 5.1 against 9.1, or that Fearless has sold 3 against 11, etc., etc., etc. So without that context, you don't get to understand fully what these numbers mean against each other. I'm not saying that this context isn't earned. I'm not saying it's not deserved. It's not useful to the reader. But we need to understand when we see things like this, that the writer could have easily not done that. And the next time we read an article with numbers that are just being compared like this, we have to ask the question, okay, what additional context might be there that we're not getting? How do the differences between the kind of full numbers here, 2.3 million and 8.6 million, matter in terms of percentages? Sometimes percentages are more or less useful. You might have read that you can lie with statistics. This is what that means, right? You can take numbers that are obvious on their face, and without that context, they can be made to tell a story that maybe isn't in full the reality of the situation. And then they get into reading her letter. We'll come back to this because I did want to show you how this looked on Taylor Swift's website. I got to be honest with you. I think I would go blind if I tried to read this to you live on stream. It's not the most conducive to reading, at least to me. But again, this is part of how Taylor Swift conducts business, by looking like she is very approachable and trying to communicate directly with her fans. Again, I say that, and I know it sounds a little bit like I'm trying to disparage. I'm not. I think it's a very effective public relations strategy. I do recognize it as a public relations strategy. There's nothing wrong with that. Then we see Taylor's full message. I'm trying to gather my thoughts into something coherent, but right now my mind is just a slideshow. A flashback sequence of all the times I daydreamed about, wished for, and pined away for a chance to get to tell you this news. All the times I was this close, reaching out for it, only for it to fall through. I almost stopped thinking it could ever happen after 20 years of having the carrot dangled and then yanked away. But that's all in the past now. I've been bursting into tears of joy at random intervals ever since I found out that this is really happening. I really get to say these words. All of the music I've ever made now belongs to me. And all my music videos. All the concert films, the album art and photography, the unreleased songs, the memories, the magic, the madness. Every single era. My entire life's work. To say this is my greatest dream come true is actually being pretty reserved about it. To my fans, you know how important this has been to me. So much so that I meticulously re-recorded and released 4 of my albums, calling them Taylor's version. The passionate support you showed those albums and the success story you turned the Eras Tour into is why I was able to buy back my music. Yes, I had a heck of a lot of money. I can't thank you enough for helping to reunite me with this art that I've dedicated my life to, but have never owned until now. All I've ever wanted was the opportunity to work hard enough to be able to one day purchase my music outright with no strings attached, no partnership, with full autonomy. I will be forever grateful to everyone at Shamrock Capital for being the first people to ever offer this to me. The way they've handled every interaction we've had has been honest, fair, and respectful. This was a business deal to them, but I really felt like they saw it for what it was to me. My memories and my sweat and my handwriting and my decades of dreams. I am endlessly thankful. My first tattoo might just be a huge shamrock in the middle of my forehead. Now that would be a public relations move. I know. What about Rep TV? Reputation, Taylor's version. Full transparency, I haven't even re-recorded a quarter of it. The Reputation album was so specific to that time in my life, and I kept hitting a stopping point when I tried to remake it. All that defiance, that longing to be understood while feeling purposely misunderstood, that desperate hope, that shame-born snarl and mischief. To be perfectly honest, it's the one album in the first 6 that I thought couldn't be improved upon by redoing it. Not the music, or photos, or videos. So I kept putting it off. There will be a time, if you're into the idea, for the unreleased vault tracks from that album to hatch. I've already completely re-recorded my entire debut album, and I really love how it sounds now. I think that's the one of the last 2. Those 2 albums can still have their moments to reemerge when the time is right, if that would be something you guys would be excited about. But if it happens, it won't be from a place of sadness and longing for what I wish I could have. It will just be a celebration now. I'm extremely heartened by the conversations that this saga has reignited within my industry among artists and fans. More on that in a minute. Every time a new artist tells me they negotiated to own their master recordings and their record contract because of this fight, I'm reminded of how important it was for all of this to happen. Thank you for being curious about something that used to be thought of as too industry-centric for broad discussion. You'll never know how much it means to me that you cared. Every single bit of it counted and ended up here. Thanks to you and your goodwill, teamwork, and encouragement, the best things that have ever been mine finally actually are. Elated and amazed, Taylor. Now, it's worth noting a couple of things here. One, that is 100% intended to make you feel like she's a person. She's talking specifically to her fans. There's a lot of run-on sentences and a lot of kind of internet speak there. That's all fine and good. The other thing I wanted to note, though, was that by Billboard Pro including this here, again, it frames out this story as one of a girl who just wanted her music back against private equity firms that just wanted to make business deals, right? And that might be exactly what happened, But we can frame any story in any given way. And the reason Billboard does it here is because Taylor Swift is a recording artist. Taylor Swift is the one with all the fans. They want to sell this story to people that are otherwise interested in it. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Doesn't mean Billboard Pro is lying, but it does mean that everybody that writes a story, every outlet that publishes a story, is making choices about what they want to publish and what they want to write for you. And the notion that Billboard Pro here has is that if you're interested in this story, chances are you're going to be interested in it from the perspective that Taylor Swift, the underdog, is fighting against the evil, bad business corporations and finally won the day. So we're going to frame it in that way. Again, nothing wrong with that. But that is what's happening here, and we'll see it again and again in the other articles that we look at. But before we do, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it is that we're even talking about. So if you aren't familiar with this particular discussion, music is a really weird part of intellectual property. And the reason it's so weird is because there's statutory rules about what you can reproduce. There's mechanics rights and all sorts of other things. But I wanted to explain the difference between masters and composition here because it's a part of this story. It's a part of how this story even develops. So how do copyrights and music work? This is from a legal website, but this is all kind of framed as general information here. So all copyright owners have certain exclusive rights, which include the right to protect musical works, will protect any work, such as sheet music, ensuring their distribution and sale are regulated under copyright law. So when we talk about copyrights in virtual legality, I give you the bundle of rights here. You have the ability to control how your intellectual property is copied. That's the copyright itself, just the word. The ability to control how it's distributed, publicly performed, derivatives are created from it, and how it's displayed. Federal copyright protection, particularly significant since 1972, has enabled sound recordings to be copyrighted, distinguishing between the material recorded and the sound recording itself, and setting eligibility requirements for copyright protection. Every recorded song has two copyrights, one in the musical composition and one in the sound recording. So if you think about this as the script to a movie, then you know that a scriptwriter can essentially license out the right to make a movie from the script, and then that movie studio could make it. But if the scriptwriter held on to the rights to that script, they would hold on to that intellectual property and they could license it to a different movie studio to make a different movie, right? So we see this a lot with scripts and story ideas that come into the public domain. If you think about something like Romeo and Juliet, as a for instance, the Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio version of Romeo and Juliet was not what was originally envisioned by Shakespeare, but that didn't prevent that movie from being made. That didn't prevent West Side Story from being made. And if it wasn't in the public domain and Shakespeare were out there hawking his movie scripts to various movie studios, he could have done that. But because movie studios don't want to have that out there, they generally buy the rights to scripts in exclusivity, right? So any given person that makes intellectual property can move something exclusively to someone else. But in this particular case, the way the way the music industry works is you've got these producers, you've got these studios, these labels that help take a composition. Taylor Swift actually writing music on a page, writing the lyrics down, writing the notes as they are, helps them be recorded with band help, with studio help, with mixing help, whatever it might be. And then the end result, the recording, the actual tape of that performance is theirs, while the composition can stay with the artist. Now, there's other contract things happening there as we go through this particular story, but that's the end result of this particular kind of controversy, is that Taylor Swift held and then regained the right to make new recordings from the things that she composed, while this one particular music label that gets moved between these private equity companies held the rights to the original recordings that she made when she originally recorded them. And then this table I don't think is very useful, so we're going to skip past it. The ownership, control, and licensing of sound recording copyrights is the record business. The making of records. We don't really make records anymore, but it's still useful. The ownership, control, and licensing of musical composition copyrights is intellectual property music publishing. The people that make things like the actual musical, I've lost the word right now, but you know what you put on the piano to play a piano tune, the actual sheet music for these things. I found it, just had to talk a little bit to get there. But that's the state of play here. I wanted to frame that out so that we understood better what we were talking about. What has been sold around her are these recordings that she originally made when they were released, for instance, on the radio. But what she retained was the fact that she wrote this music. When you make anything in the world of an intellectual kind, and it is reduced to some kind of permanent fixture, that the expression of that idea, whether it's a musical composition, a novel, or anything else, that's automatically copyrighted. And then there are other things that you can license out. When, as a music studio, you have that studio time, you have that mixing, you get certain rights as a part of the contract that you enter into with the musician there. But the musician held on to the composition rights in this particular circumstance. And we don't get a lot of that detail whenever anybody is talking about that. So I wanted to add it here in what is not a virtual legality, but a Hangouts and Headlines. But I'm still a lawyer, folks, so it is what it is. And then we've got the headline that is on the thumbnail to this video, because I thought this was a very interesting way to frame this. This is from InStyle. You'll see the Taylor Swift story in particular highlighted by a number of kind of entertainment or lifestyle magazines or outlets. I don't think that's unusual. Pop stars get this kind of treatment, but it doesn't mean that they are less important than the Washington Post and the CNNs and the other things that we discuss in Hangouts and Headlines of the world, because different people get different news from different places. So how did Taylor Swift buy back her music? Inside her battle to own her masters. And again, the framework here is Taylor Swift battled to get back what she was rightfully owed, right? That's the implied notion of all of these headlines and all these sentences, is this was just someone trying to right a wrong, and they were spending their own money to do it, and so get on her side. And the framework there is because people like narratives. Human beings like stories. The reason I just talked about movies is because movies sell because human beings like stories. That doesn't change when they go and look for news items or articles to read about what they're interested in, including Taylor Swift or anybody else. So journalists know that. They're trying to sell clicks on their website, in this case, sales of their magazine or paper in the real world, whatever it might be. And yes, that's going to tilt them in certain directions because they're going to try to get the customer what they think they want. Does that lead to biases? Does that lead to narratives more than truth content? Sometimes. I don't personally think these articles are too terribly off from what I understand of the situation, but they are certainly framed in their entirety, really, as Taylor Swift fighting the good fight against the evils of the corporatization of the music industry. One of music's most famous feuds was finally settled on May 30th, 2025, when Taylor Swift announced that she now owns her masters after a 6-year struggle to buy them back. The lengthy battle began in June 2019 when the rights to Swift's catalog were sold to music manager Scooter Braun's Ithaca Holdings. Braun then sold them to private equity firm Shamrock Capital. Speaking to People shortly after the news of Swift's purchase broke, a source explained, Taylor now owns all of her music, and this moment finally happened in spite of Scooter Braun, not because of him. So we're going to take this little lead in here, the start of this article, directing you to a different article in People to talk about Scooter Braun as the evil. Right? We've already discussed how Taylor Swift is treated as the underdog fighting the bad people. People kind of jumps on that and enhances that with Taylor Swift owns her masters in spite of Scooter Braun, not because of him, as the headline for this particular story. Scooter Braun, the bad guy here. Taylor Swift owns her masters, and it's not because of Scooter Braun. The Grammy-winning star announced on Friday, May 30th, that she has regained control of her catalog nearly 6 years after it was sold to Braun, who then sold it to private equity firm Shamrock Capital. Again, private equity firm, when you see it in a journalistic article, you're going to want to think that they want you to think negative thoughts about that entity, right? That is how I see it most often when I look at these articles, and that makes a certain amount of sense because private equity has gone in, purchased journalism outlets, and cut those jobs in the past. So there is a certain kind of understandable notion from these outlets that suggests that private equity firm is a bit of almost a swear word, in all honesty, when you see it referenced here. But importantly, in this second paragraph of People is the notion that Braun buys it and then sells it almost immediately, which again is the machinations of a kind of evil force that doesn't care about the artistry and majesty of Taylor Swift's catalog. A source close to contract negotiations tells People that the accomplishment comes on the heels of hard work from Swift's team, and that despite a recent report claiming Braun encouraged Shamrock to make the deal, the entrepreneur was not involved. Contrary to a previous false report, there was no outside party who encouraged this sale. All rightful credit for the opportunity should go to the partners at Shamrock Capital and Taylor's Nashville-based management team only. And like we saw in the Baldani and Lively fight, this is PR people fighting amongst themselves, right? Braun and Taylor are both very well-resourced individuals. And so you see there's rumors that Braun was helping to move this forward. And it's easy enough to assume that that's his public relations people saying, okay, this is going to happen. So we want to be seen as the good guys in this story if we can. Then as People describes it, they have Taylor Swift's representatives, whoever the source is, but certainly sounds like the Taylor Swift side of things, saying, nope, Braun had nothing to do with it. The only credit goes to Shamrock and Taylor's Nashville-based management team. So you get this drama, you get these good versus evil narratives as part of this. I will tell you that the truth content here is fairly low because you can see the public relations people fighting amongst themselves on this. I don't know what happened. I can't tell you here in Hangouts and Headlines that X happened in that room or Y happened in that room. But I can tell you that this has all the indications of essentially two public relations teams fighting amongst themselves. And as you can tell from the headline, Braun's team lost, right? And that makes sense because Taylor Swift has all these fans. Taylor Swift just made all this money from all those fans. Everybody doing the calculation, and calculation might be too strong a word here, but just making the choice as to how to publish and what framework we're going to put these stories in is going to look at this and say, Taylor Swift is not only the more sympathetic figure in this story, but because we know the end, because we know she succeeds, this story should be framed as good versus evil, the underdog versus the big bag private equity firm, and the guy that just doesn't care. And that is, in fact, what People does here in describing this particular story. They use a lot of Taylor Swift's commentary on, I think it's Tumblr, from the time when these sales were made to frame it out as Taylor Swift is the underdog, the good princess who's trying to fight against the evil emperor. I learned about Scooter Braun's purchase of my masters as it was announced to the world. All I could think about was the incessant manipulative bullying I've received at his hands for years. Scooter has stripped me of my life's work that I wasn't given an opportunity to buy. Essentially, my musical legacy is about to lie in the hands of someone who tried to dismantle it. Interestingly, from the corporate lawyer's perspective here, this I wasn't given an opportunity to buy is actually the most effective part of her statement from back then, which is to say, yeah, it is kind of a party foul to say, all right, this artist might have all that money because she's been hugely successful and hugely popular, but I don't specifically want her to have it, so I might take a lesser deal and not even include her in those negotiations. That's more convincing to me than some of the just kind of oblique references to incessant manipulative bullying and things that I think, at least People and other places that I've seen report on this, think is more effective to establish Taylor Swift as that kind of underdog that had to fight the big fight here. Braun, 43, later sold the catalog to Shamrock, and Swift said at the time that she'd been actively trying to regain ownership of her masters over the last year, but failed to successfully enter negotiations with Braun because she refused to sign an NDA that required her to only speak positively about the entrepreneur. Now, we don't get quotes here as to where this particular statement comes from, but it is certainly possible, in fact, I think it's probable, that anybody that was entering into a deal of this type, as Braun and Ithaca might have been at the time with Taylor Swift, would have asked for what we call a non-disparagement clause. And that basically means that you won't badmouth the person that you just entered into a contract with after the fact. But it doesn't usually require you to only say good things. It just requires you to be silent if you have bad things to say. And so this could be a situation where she was asked to sign a non-disparagement clause and then framed it in this particular way because she knew she had sympathetic media to cover it for her. And this does, in fact, look very sympathetic towards Ms. Swift. Or it could be the case that Braun and Ithaca didn't ask for a standard non-disparagement clause, but actually asked for some kind of formalistic, you must say good things about us after the fact kind of clause, which as a lawyer, I would have trouble saying to my client would be enforceable by a court because specific performance requiring somebody to do something is always difficult in a contract, but could be the case, right? We don't know. What we do know is that People reported on this as if it happened because Taylor Swift said it happened, and it otherwise isn't interrogated as part of this article, again, because the framework here is Taylor Swift is the good guy. We don't want to interrogate the good guy's statements. In the same statement that we just read over on Billboard, Swift announced she'd be re-recording her first 6 albums as a means of giving herself ownership of her masters. She kicked things off with Fearless in April 2021, and then this goes down the whole list. In an interview with Variety in 2021, Braun expressed his regret over the situation and said, "It makes me sad that Taylor had that reaction to the deal. All of what happened has been very confusing and not based on anything factual. I don't know what story she was told. I asked for her to sit down with me several times, but she refused. I offered to sell her the catalog back and went under NDA. That's non-disclosure agreement, keeping things confidential, but her team refused, he said. It all seems very unfortunate. Open communication is important and can lead to understanding. She and I only met briefly 3 or 4 times in the past, and all our interactions were really friendly and kind. I find her to be an incredibly talented artist and wish her nothing but the best. And then this article basically finishes with Swift left Big Machine 2 years before the label was acquired and signed with Universal Music Group in November 2018. Through her new deal, all the master recordings that she makes belongs to her. And that's another important aspect of this, right? The situation is that she didn't have her masters because the studio was making that money, spending that money to make those masters happen. We talked about that being the kind of standard, especially when you are up and coming in the industry. But like every other part of the entertainment industry, when you get big enough, when you're making the labels enough money, you can negotiate because you have leverage for more perks, more goodies in the contract that you have entered into. So by the time Taylor Swift in 2018 is negotiating a contract with Universal, she has the ability to say, okay, I care about this and this and this. I don't necessarily care about this and this, but I'm going to ask for these things that you maybe wouldn't have given me when I was a young and up and coming artist, because now you know that as long as you get me signed under contract, I'm very likely to make you tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's like every novelist that you see that no longer needs an editor from the publisher or anything else that they get as benefits, a big advance and a unending, interminable deal time frame, say George R.R. Martin and his delivery of Winds of Winter whenever he feels like it. Those are the kinds of things that you can earn when you make the money people a lot of money beforehand. And so Taylor Swift clearly learned that she wanted these master recordings. They're meaningful to her for whatever reason. And she said, I'm going to enter into my next contract to make sure I have that control. But it's not necessarily standard, which is also a part of this story. Now, back to the In Style article. That was just the first paragraph. We continue on to their explanation of events. There's still hope for Reputation diehards, as she hinted that unreleased vault tracks may be in the future. We saw that in the statement in the Billboard article. In July 2019, Swift took to Tumblr to inform her fans that Scooter Braun had purchased her masters. In her post, she claimed to be blindsided by the news, writing that she learned about Scooter Braun's purchase as it was announced to the world. Since leaving her record label Big Machine in 2018, Swift's catalog had been owned by label founder Scott Borchetta, and I apologize in advance for any pronunciations that Swifties or otherwise know are wrong. He sold them to Braun's Ithaca Holdings the following year. Essentially, my musical legacy is about to lie in the hands of someone who tried to dismantle it, Swift explained in her Tumblr post, pointing to a past incident in which she alleges Braun persuaded clients to bully her online. Now, this is another area where I think it's important to kind of read very carefully as to what's being said in reporting here. And this is the explained reference that I just highlighted on screen just now. Ordinarily, if you had any notions of someone just stating something and you haven't otherwise looked into how true it is, you would use a word like claims or alleges here, right? Essentially, my musical legacy is about to lie in the hands of someone who tried to dismantle it. Explained is a more definitive term. That Swift is saying what the truth is. She explained, she revealed. Other words that mean that this is what actually happened. And now you might argue, well, Swift is talking about her feelings on the matter, so she is the one that is best entitled to explain something like this. It's still worth noting that when you see this referenced in this and other articles, it is designed to kind of encourage you towards whatever was just said is the truth of the matter asserted. The same month that the sale took place, Kelly Clarkson posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, and in fact probably was at the time, suggesting Swift re-record her songs. You should go in and re-record all the songs that you don't own the masters on, exactly how you did them, but put brand new art and some kind of incentive so fans will no longer buy the old versions. I'd buy all of the new versions just to prove a point. And then Swift started doing just that in August of 2019. And then there's more drama, right? Drama also sells. We like narratives, good versus evil, hero versus villain, underdog versus evil corporation. We also like drama. In November 2019, the artist took to Tumblr once more to share that she was being honored with the Artist of the Decade award at that year's AMAs. Unfortunately, she claimed that Borchetta and Braun, see that claimed there, prohibited her from performing her old songs at the event or in her then forthcoming Netflix documentary 2020's Miss Americana. Now, the reason they use claimed is because they're also going to report on the fact that Borchetta and Braun deny this entirely. Please let Scott Borchetta and Scooter Braun know how you feel about this, she asked fans in her post. Scooter also manages several artists who I really believe care about other artists and their work. Please ask them for help with this. I'm hoping that maybe they can talk some sense into the men who are exercising tyrannical control over someone who just wants to play the music she wrote. The other artists in question, likely Ariana Grande and Justin Bieber, two of Braun's most prominent clients at the time. Big Machine Records responded one day later, denying Swift's version of events and causing the drama to go even more viral. They alleged that Taylor owed millions of They alleged that Taylor owed millions of dollars in multiple assets to our company, which is responsible for 120 hardworking employees who helped build her career. The company statement also referred to her Tumblr post as based on false information. The label got a rapid response from Swift's longtime publicist, Tree Payne, asserting that Taylor's version of events was the truth. Asserting there, again, claims, allegations, etc. While she since deleted her ex post about the matter, in her archived statement, Payne turned the tables on Big Machine. Now, it's interesting because you don't usually see while they deleted this and then used for truth value. She wrote, Big Machine is trying to deflect and make this about money by saying she owes them, but an independent professional auditor, aka our guy, has determined that Big Machine owes Taylor $7.9 million of unpaid royalties over several years. So this is a fight. They're infighting about these various things. The feud almost hit a boiling point before Big Machine told TMZ that Swift could perform her entire catalog at the AMAs after all. 2 days later, Swift performed at the AMAs, shaking off the drama. Yes, I see what you did there, in style. So, a lot of drama here, but it does raise the question that isn't addressed by these paragraphs as to, okay, we know that some point in the very near future from when this story is being described, that Taylor Swift and her legal team, more importantly, believes that she has the right to re-record her compositions. Those are what the Taylor's versions are. So what is this fight even about at the time? Yes, they're arguing over royalties owed and whatnot, but if Taylor Swift has the ability to record later on, why doesn't she have the ability to perform at an award show like the AMAs? And that isn't answered for us here. We have to read between the lines and see further on that it's only when it actually gets sold to Shamrock that she is released from whatever exclusivity provisions would have been binding her from performing her own compositions before that point in time. But this is the kind of thing that would be useful for a business or legal reporter to get in and say, this doesn't make any sense as described. We know what you just talked about with respect to the re-recordings, so this set of paragraphs doesn't make sense. And yet, we can start to get a little bit of sense as we go further on. Braun sold the masters in November 2020 in a deal worth $300 million. As Variety reported at the time, Swift would be allowed to re-record songs from her earlier albums starting that month. So we go to this Variety article. I think that's what I got next. We'll see. Scooter Braun sells Taylor Swift's Big Machine masters for big payday. Swift's catalog from her 2006 self-titled debut to 2017's Reputation was believed to be worth some $140 million. I think that's when it was bought by Ithaca, and then he sells it for $300 million, I guess. Ithaca purchased the Nashville-based independent record label Big Machine, founded by Scott Borchetta in 2005, in June 2019 for just over $300 million. So the label gets bought by Scooter Braun's Ithaca Holdings in 2019 for $300 million, and Swift's catalog at that point in time is thought to be worth about $140 million, or about half that value. We believe, based on the Billboard article, that Taylor Swift buys her label back, or her masters back, for about $360 million, which does seem like a pretty good deal for Shamrock. Swift is free to re-record songs from her first 5 BMLG-issued albums as of this month. While most contemporary recording contracts have provisions prohibiting the artist from recutting material for a period of years, Swift likely had favorable terms in her contract that would make her songs eligible for re-recording at a certain point after the end of each album cycle, not the end of her overall contract. So I think Variety is reporting on this very neutrally. I want to give them credit for that. But I think from a legal perspective, it's also important to discuss what is happening here, right? So again, because these particular companies are buying the services necessary to make a radio-ready recording of these compositions, then they retain certain rights to the exclusivity of the masters, and then they also would have in their contracts something that helps prevent you from going out, collecting all that money, getting the thing on the radio, and then making a competing version immediately thereafter. So it says here in Variety that the standard recording contract says you aren't going to make a new version of this for X amount of years. And then as you get bigger, as you get more popular, as you become Taylor Swift, you can start to kind of chip away at these various things that are designed to protect the labels, designed to protect the studios versus you, because you're so popular, because the inherent value of your contract is so much. And we see this in all sorts of industries. I see this every day in the contracts that I negotiate, which is to say, this is what we talk about when we talk about leverage. When you are that valuable, you can start to ask for more. And that isn't the case for Taylor Swift. That's the case for everybody else. But Variety says that's what was happening here, is that there was a contract exclusivity provision in the original contract that helped her record for Big Machine. And then that expired at the same time that the catalog was sold forward to Shamrock. So that's all important information. It isn't otherwise covered in the In Style article, but we can kind of glean it from these various places if we're willing, as we do in Hangouts and Headlines, to go through 25 articles to try to come to an understanding of whatever's happening in a story. And I don't suggest that people do this for everything that they have to read. My only suggestion is that people understand that this is happening in basically everything. If it's happening at the level of Taylor Swift and master recordings, it's happening in terms of international politics. It's happening in terms of whatever else you might be reading in the newspaper or the outlets that you most prefer. And so that's why we do Hangouts and Headlines, to just discuss how media works. Not that they're trying to lie to you, but that they do have narratives to sell. And that occurs even at a higher level of what they choose to report on. They think you're interested in Taylor Swift. A lot of people undoubtedly are. And that's why they are covering it now. And that's why they're covering it in this specific way. And then they go through some lyrics that people analyze to see if she's talking about Scooter Braun. I didn't find that super interesting. That's why you don't see any highlights. They finish with cue the mic drop. So it's that kind of outlet. But we are ready to proceed onward to other headlines. We're not actually going to look at the bulk of these stories, but the headlines themselves. Here is Time reporting on how Taylor Swift buying back her masters could impact her re-recording project and more. So a little bit more kind of detailed analysis. This is the kind of thing you see from outlets that say Taylor Swift is popular. We see people searching for Taylor Swift. The most common search term I saw when I was doing the prep for this video was, how did Taylor Swift buy back her masters from Scooter Braun, which isn't specifically true. In this particular case, she bought them back from Shamrock, the second purchaser. But that's how people are looking for these things. And so you see an outlet like Time say, all right, we're going to talk about this, but we don't want to get into the in-style weeds. We don't want to talk about the drama on Tumblr, etc. We want to talk about how this might impact the future Taylor's version recording project. And that's what they are choosing to focus on. Similarly, you see The Ringer here say Taylor Swift won her biggest battle. Swift's quest to reclaim her masters was the through line during the biggest 6 years of her career. Now that fight is over. So they're framing it exactly as I said before. This is the underdog princess fighting against the evil emperor, and how she won is what's most important to understand here. It's a story of good versus evil, and that's how you see these stories so often framed. Billboard Pro has another article, which I love you guys, but I'm not willing to spend $200 a year to go read. And it's framed around a similar thing to what Time was framing their story around. How Taylor Swift's Masters battle changed the narrative around ownership for artists. I do think stories like this one and stories like Lively versus Baldani, which we covered earlier in the year, are useful for people that are interested in popular culture for the most part to interact with things that are maybe more technical or business or legal focused in nature. And I do think that changes things, right? Recording artists don't know what they don't know as to what's even negotiable in a contract. We see that in virtual legality and other stories that I cover in this space. And that's totally fine. You're not supposed to be a lawyer or to know everything about business when you get into recording music for yourself. But it does mean that stories like this help shine a spotlight on what's in play in these contracts, right? Or as this subheadline says, Taylor shined a big bright light on it and showed it could be done successfully, says one music lawyer. What's different now? Again, I didn't purchase the subscription to go and read this article, so we're just focusing on the headline and subheadline here. But I think that subheadline belies a certain important facet of this story, which is to say, you're not Taylor Swift, right? If you're a young recording artist, you can know that this is a potential issue in the future. At some level, you might have to take that liability, that exposure, however you feel about a term like the masters are going to go to the studio and say, yes, this is what I have to agree to get my foot in the door. They really are spending money to get the mixing done and to get this recording completed. And maybe when I'm more successful, I too can spend more than $250 million to get my masters back. But that's something for future me to worry about. And that's not great. That's not necessarily what you love to say to prospective clients if they're sitting across the table from me or what have you. But that's the reality of leverage and contract negotiations. So I do think she shined a spotlight on the difference between composition rights and recording rights, and that's going to be useful for people that want to go in and understand what they can negotiate in their contract. I do think stories like this lend towards a kind of WebMD effect in some respects when you're talking to your lawyers or your agents or what have you, which is to say, I know that I could have this potential disease. Is there anything you can do for me now? And sometimes the lawyer has to say, that's good. It's great that you know that. But that's not necessarily something we want to focus on when we can make sure that you get a good advance up front. We can make sure that you get the rights that are more likely to impact you because you're not Taylor Swift than anything else. And sometimes those can lead to complicated conversations with prospective clients and otherwise. But overall, I have this channel. I make these videos because I think more education is better, more information is better. And so I do think that it does change things when we talk about stories like this for people that aren't otherwise interested in business and law stories overall. So I wanted to highlight that. I also wanted to highlight that just because you're a hero in one story doesn't mean you're a hero in all of them. And that's a part of this discussion of narratives and good versus evil as well. I talked about Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively earlier. Taylor Swift is an important figure in that story, especially if you followed this very closely. You know Taylor Swift was a friend of Blake Lively's, may still be a friend of Blake Lively's. We don't know. Blake Lively described her as a Game of Thrones dragon that did her bidding, which I don't think is accurate, but there's a lot of stuff that Blake Lively said in the various things that came out as part of this legal feud as described by ABC News. But Taylor Swift is an important figure. She was facing a subpoena to provide testimony in respect of Justin Baldoni's position on this particular score. That appears to have been dropped. This article says it's all sources that says that, and it says the sources say that the subpoena is dropped because it's no longer needed, because necessary information has been obtained, which may or may not be things like cell phone records, etc. It really depends on what's happening here. But Taylor Swift, any other public figure, is going to have a different role in different stories, and you'll see that the media in general is willing to characterize whoever in whatever role most fits the narrative that they want to put forward. I am not sitting here telling you that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. Human beings like stories, but it's important to understand as you read through them that that's what's happening in basically everything that you read. And that's why I wanted to do Hangouts and Headlines today. I almost called it Virtual Legality. If you like this content, if you like me doing videos like this one, like Emily D. Baker says that she does, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon or doing memberships here at the channel or super chats. Everything is helpful. Every little bit helps. The revenues for ads on Google and YouTube are a little bit down this year. And so anything you can do to help support conversations like this one is super appreciated. Of course, if that's not in your wheelhouse or if you just don't want to do that, just subscribing to the channel so that you get alerts as to when I'm doing videos, telling your friends that we're having conversations like this one. All of that is super helpful, and I am so appreciative of every little bit of it. Now, as promised, I wanted to address some questions and comments as we got to the end of this video. Now, I also promised that I was going to take some more breaks in the middle of those article runs, and I didn't do that. So if you have comments that just want to call me a liar as to what I said earlier on, you can absolutely do that. Otherwise, I am just going to take whatever questions and comments you have about this particular topic. Do you love Taylor Swift? Do you love Scooter Braun? I honestly don't know if there's anybody out there, based on what I was reading in the articles, that does, but maybe you think this is entirely wrong and should be read a different way as we go forward looking at this particular story. Let me know in the comments, and otherwise, I will see you on the next Hangouts and Headlines, which I am very hopeful will not be 4 months from now. Should be earlier. Thank you so much for being here. I don't see any comments jumping off the screen here. Let me see if I can find any. There's a conversation going on, presumably about whether I mischaracterized something horribly. Captain Crunch here says, Hoeg, I hope you are well. I am doing well. A lot of the delay here has been about me getting some kind of work pattern that I can sustain in my law firm and channel life. So I am doing well. I have no complaints. I have no further brain injuries to report upon at this time, but I really appreciate your inquiry and I can happily say that things are going well. Tide is out there telling folks that I'm not giving official legal advice. I hope I didn't suggest that I was at some point in time, but that is very good comment from Against the Tide. I am not giving official legal advice. This is all intended for information and education and ultimately entertainment, right? You tuned into this video to get that information and education, hopefully in an entertaining way, if I'm doing my job correctly. So thank you, Tide, for making that clear. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Esquilter, for hashtag Team Hoeg. I really appreciate it. You guys have been so supportive throughout this entire 2-year period, 2+ year period from my stroke. So I really appreciate it from everybody. Emily Aarons asked the important question. So am I the only one whose favorite Taylor is Ducey? I was just watching Gilmore Girls last night. Yes, I have a poll up asking for folks' favorite Taylor. The first option is, of course, Swift. The second option is Tim the Tool Man from Home Improvement fame. The third one is Dosey from Gilmore Girls, because my wife is nothing if not a huge Gilmore Girls fan, and Taylor Dosey is the fun character in Stars Hollow that is always doing things that gets the plot a-moving. And then, of course, the last one is Gary Oldman from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So it's a close fight right now. Swift, unsurprisingly, leading the pack here, both because of her level of popularity and because she's the subject of this video. But I do like to do those fun polls. Emily, I'm glad that you voted for Taylor Dosey. Thank you so much. Tracy says, bye all. Cactus Lonesome says, need more, miss you. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to probably keep these closer to an hour as a time frame that I can sustain rather than the hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever I was doing before. But we'll see. I miss you all as well. I love having these conversations. I love seeing all your comments after the video is archived and put on the channel. I love to have those conversations as well because these are things that are interesting to me. All right, everybody. I think that's it. Nobody has any more thoughts on Taylor Swift and Scooter Braun, or just in general narratives in good versus evil in journalism and media presentations generally? So thank you so much. And again, if you're at all interested, check out Karen Reed. Emily D. Baker is live, at least as of the start of this video. I think she's probably still live because I think that case is never going to end. And if it does end, they'll just declare a mistrial and there'll be a third Karen Reed. Who knows? But if you're interested in that, go check her out on Emily D. Baker. And Hangouts and Headlines is here in part because she's encouraging me to do so. So thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for everybody being here. And I guess thank you so much, media, for continuing to make stories that I find interesting enough to talk to you all about.